Alex, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You can hear me, Alex. Guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
We can.
Yep. You can. Okay.
You froze for a little while.
Yeah, I've turned my camera off. I think it's bandwidth, which doesn't help. I'd really be interested, first of all, just to understand who's on the call for a couple of minutes. So if I can start by telling you who I am, and then we can sort of go around the room, though I can't see everybody's images now. So first of all, my name is Joe Celia. Lovely. I'm the technical director here at FIS. We're the trade body that represents the finishes and interior sector, and George has asked me whether I could help sort of steer this first meeting. So Gis, can I come on to you, and then we'll go on to you, Matt Taylor?
Yep.
Jess, you're on mute.
Yeah, and this I basically work with George and Richard with the BIM for housing and do the administrative stuff with them.
Lovely, thank you. So I'm going to go to Jimmy Collins and then Matt, and you're on mute, Jimmy.
Morning, everyone. My name is Jimmy Collins. I'm the National Specification Director at Knauf.
Thank you. Matt?
Morning, everyone. I'm Matt Taylor. I'm the Director of Taylor Design Consultancy, and we deal with ensuring compliant detailing for drylining contractors, main contractors, architects, practices, etc. Trying to ensure that the interface detailing and wall types that we've got across projects throughout the UK are maintaining the performances as should be.
Lovely, perfect, Matt. I'll go to Paul Marsh and then Duncan, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Marsh. I'm the Head of Delivery for Safer Buildings at Metropolitan Thames Valley. So I'm the end user of these products often.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. We'll go to Duncan and then the other Paul, please.
Hiya, my name is Duncan Alabaster. I'm the Technical Manager at Protector. We make fire stopping products, and our brief is always how can we improve the fire resistance of the wall?
Lovely.
Wrong way round, really.
Thanks, Duncan. So Paul, and then we'll go to Robert, please.
Okay, yeah, Paul Oakley, architect by profession. I also sit on the sort of ISO relating to international data dictionaries 12006-3. Also, I previously was the BIM director at BRE, so involved heavily with the template work with George and Active Plan originally.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Paul. So I'll go to Robert and then Joe, please.
I'm Technical Manager at ETEX Building Performance, which the main brand in this sector is Cineapp, then also ProMat, also involved in firewalls, and sister company FSI for fire stopping.
Thank you. Joe and then Patrick, please.
Yeah, I'm Joe Stott. I'm the practice BIM manager for AHR, but I'm an architect by training, so I've got a lot of experience in specifying partitions and, you know, across a number of different sectors.
Lovely, thanks, Joe. Patrick and then Richard, please.
Oh, right, yes, good morning. I am an architect in private practice. I have been part of this working group for about a year and a half. I previously chaired BIM for Housing for a short period, immediately, no, not quite before George. And I am running a social housing startup at the moment for the locality where I'm based in Wiltshire.
Lovely, thank you, Patrick. Richard and then Martin, please.
Hi there, I'm Richard Freer. I'm a director of BIM for Housing, and I will be observing, and I will be compiling the report that comes out of this meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Thanks for your help. Martin and then Alex, please.
Hello, Martin Milner, Milner Associates and the Structural Timber Association consultant, looking at dry lining solutions for structural timber.
Perfect. Thanks, Martin. Alex and then George, please.
My name's Alex Double from ADDC. We're an independent consultancy which specialises in drywall, fire protection and fire stopping.
Thanks, Alex. George?
Yeah, I'm George Stevenson. I'm for housing. I'm also chairing the GTI initiative, asset and survey information, which is informing MHCLG, or whatever the new term is now. I'm also the managing director of Active Plan, which is a software company.
Thank you very much indeed. Have I missed anybody? No, that's really good. Okay. I think it's good to know who is on the call and the level of expertise that we've got and the different ways that we've got looking at this. I wanted to start because one of the emails that I saw this morning was about the word firewall and where has the word firewall come from and why we discuss it in these terms. It's a word that I've put forward in conversations because we talk often about fire stopping, fire bats, we talk about fire doors, but we never talk about fire walls. We talk about dry lining, but of course dry lining can be used in so many different ways. And I wanted to try and sort of separate this idea that particular walls are required to have fire resistance as part of compartmentation. And if we start referring to them as firewalls, I think we'll get more people looking at them. George, right at the beginning of this, we started to look at definitions. Should we define what dry lining is as the first, so that we understand it?
Yes, please.
Okay, Richard, I think I put forward a suggestion, perhaps, that we can chew over for a couple of minutes. Do you want to put that up on the screen?
Jess, yeah.
That looks like Debbie just joined.
Yes, sorry I'm late. I was on another call.
Ah, is that Debbie Carlson? Debbie, is that Debbie Carlton?
It is.
Oh,
it is.
It is. Good.
It is. Yeah.
Debbie, can you just quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, Debbie Carlton. I'm from Dynamic Knowledge. It's a niche consultancy in competency management methodologies and technologies, and we're pretty active in the built environment. And a long time ago, I was a civil engineer.
Lovely. Thanks, Debbie. Right. So we were going to share a screen, I think.
It's up there now, Joe.
Is it? No, it's not coming up on mine at all. Okay. Can somebody just read out what was there then, rather than Richard? Could you read out the definition that I put forward?
Yes. The dry lining definition is single or multiple layers of plasterboard attached to both sides of studs, with the option to install insulation within the cavity of the wall using mechanical fixings taped and sealed at joints, allowing for finishing.
So has anybody got any comments on that as a definition? And I think, Alex, I saw from you saying about other than plasterboards.
Yeah, I just wonder whether that's the definition we would use in BS 8212 or 8000 Part 8, but it's whether this definition expands out into other types of boards like calcium silicate boards, typically used by ProMat and the like, or other boards that you may come across that aren't technically a plasterboard, i.e. a paper-faced gypsum-based board.
Has anybody else got any comments there? I can see some hands up. You'll have to excuse me because all I can see is little icons now. So JS.
That's me. I was just going to ask, is this excluding shaft wall? Because it just mentions attached to both sides of studs in that definition.
It's interesting.
Same with external walls as well.
Yeah.
Should be a wall lining, yeah, or could be.
So, okay, so does anybody want to make some suggested changes to the draft, first of all, about boards?
What we normally do, Joe, is that if people have got suggestions, we ask them to type them in the chat, and then we can then Jess will then copy them over in the document.
Perfect. Okay, so if you can do that. So there's a couple of things that have come out of that. One is a description of the board. The second from Joe was about items like shaft wall, but also about lining systems, where of course the board is only attached to one side of the stud. And Martin, I've just used the word stud in there rather than defining whether it should be steel or timber. Just wanted to make sure that
That's okay.
sat well with you as well.
Yep.
I can see some other hands are up, but I can't see whose they are, unfortunately. If you've got your hand up, have you got a contribution that you want to make?
So yeah, Paul Oakley. Yeah. So I mean, my house actually has walls of 3 layers of plasterboard stuck together. So there is no stud. It's just drylining. But rather, besides the things that have already been picked up, was what we're doing about ceilings.
Yeah, that's the point that Alex made in terms of lining systems as well. So I think that would come under that. So again, if you drop your comments into the chat, and then Richard will pick up on that. But you're quite right, Paul. Completely agree with you.
Joe, shouldn't we? It's Debbie here. Should we not state what the purpose or function is in the definition? To do what? Yes. To achieve what?
Okay.
Yeah, I put that in the chat as well.
That's great. Thanks, Debbie. Thank you very much. And we'll come back and look at those a little later. So we've got questions. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions. And I think the way that we're going to approach it is to have 10 minutes sort of chat on each of the questions, have some debate, and then put comments back into the chat box. That's the right way, I think, isn't it, George?
It is. That's exactly right. Thank you.
Lovely stuff. Okay, so Richard, the first question.
So, Robert, you wanted to say something?
Just very quickly, I struggle with firewall. As I mentioned, I think it's either a fire compartment wall or a fire resisting wall. I don't think there is a such thing as a firewall. I get where you're going with that, Joe, in order to try and draw attention to
sure.
considering fire requirements of walls, but I think it's either you could either call it a fire resisting wall or a fire compartment wall.
Yep, happy for those to go into the chat there. Absolutely. And that's what today's about, Robert.
Yep.
You know, to get a collective view on this that can be distilled down into a single document.
Joe, can I just explain why framed the first question about risks?
Yes, please.
When we started the Thread Initiative work, the HSE briefed me that what they wanted to know was not simply the information about an active type or a product. They wanted it to come from the perspective of what risk the item protecting against.
Indeed.
So that's why it comes from that perspective. I think.
So if you're not talking, can I just ask you to mute your microphones, please, especially if we've got any background chat going on. Thank you very much. So the first question, I think, is what risks does dry lining offer? Unfortunately, I can't see the screen, so I can't see what it is that you're looking at.
Oh, crikey. Okay, that's just difficult. Right, okay.
It's a challenge for me, George.
Jess, could you email Joe the master document? It's the one, actually, Joe, that we issued yesterday. So you should.
No, I can find that. I can find that from here now.
Yeah.
Thanks, George. Yeah, good hint.
Yeah. So if the long and short of it is that we want a long list of all the risks that potentially this group thinks could be mitigated by dry lining. Are there any that you would like to add that aren't on that list?
I think there might be some that potentially might need removal.
No, we don't need to remove them. Alex. I don't think we can do that later.
Okay.
But if people have said that they think that's important, where the process that we're operating here, and I probably should explain this.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is collect the sort of expertise from across the range, and there's certain people that will want more or less detail, and certain things need fleshing out. Certainly, it's a living document, and what we're doing is this will be, if you like, a master data dictionary, which can then be filtered according to different use cases. So I cut across you there, Alex, and I apologise for that because I know
that's fine.
So what was there a particular thing that you were concerned about that you think is on there that shouldn't be on there at all?
It's just about the spread of smoke. I think sometimes it can be a little bit misunderstood with we're talking dry lining that they will or they can stop ambient temperature smoke, but obviously when you witness a fire test, you can see that they do allow the passage of smoke, so they're not actually a smoke barrier as such. That's not their primary function. They're a fire resisting construction. It's just important to, because we get that a lot of times on projects where people are expectation is a smoke and toxic gas and all those kind of barriers, and that's not that's only because it says spread of smoke and hot gases.
Okay, so essentially what you're saying is that needs to be qualified.
Yeah, I'm happy. Now I understand the document. It's kind of like a dump of all the thoughts and everything. And then there's I know this isn't the final document, but it's just I just wanted to just note that.
Good, thank you. Would you mind just jotting down in the chat your that and that we can pick up obviously later.
Sure.
Brilliant. Joe, have you got the document now?
I have, yes.
Okay. Do you want to? If anybody's got any other points that haven't been covered in there, drop them into the chat. Or now we could move on to the next one, which is the things that people do to dry lining.
Where are they susceptible?
Yes.
So the sort of thing that comes to mind there is not installed correctly, or penetrations going through there. So again, what we're looking for is, have we missed anything in that list?
Do you want to take just a few minutes to read it if you've not had a chance? Because I appreciate I issued all this over the weekend and I apologise for that. But we've been up against it a little bit.
Okay, so let's just have a quick run through as well. Incorrect assembly, incorrect selection of systems, incorrect installation to the structure, services penetrating or partly penetrating and not being compliantly sealed. Risk of additional items being placed into an escape route, sofa, not having been considered at the design stage, could provide fuel for a fire. Risk of incorrect replacement of components having been installed. Risk of human intervention on ancillary assets, such as smoke detectors impacting on the asset's performance. Risk of information on an additional asset being incomplete, inaccurate, or absent. Risk of information on an individual asset not being supplied in both digital and physical format. Risk that the asset has not been tested against the cause and effect document. Risks of other trade and employees not appreciating the asset's function and so compromising its performance. And that could be sticking services through after the product's been installed. Risk of non-appreciation of the difference between a performance of assets in compartmentalized areas versus performance of assets in shared circulation areas. Risk of vandalism, simple misuse. Risk of being compromised through introduction of windows, cavities, pipes. Risk of gaps. Substitution of components. Incorrect installation of mastics, deflection heads, fixings. Assume performance based on old data. Interfaces with other elements, passive fire protection, doors. lack of coordinated leading or bespoke details, and untested installations not being installed. Installation incorrect, not being documented, not being inspected, not being maintained, accidental damage, wear and tear, modifications, non-compliance with manufacturers' tested systems, poor standard of specification, inherent oversimplification, substandard design information, unbuildable details, absence of design construction information, untested systems, incorrectly applied testing of systems, insufficient time available for specialist design involvement, poor standards of workmanship, and altering methodology between systems and manufacturers. So if we've missed anything there in that, please add them to the chat, and then Richard will pick those up and add them to the master document.
Joe, that we've had some more issued this morning that weren't in the version that I've sent you.
Yeah.
So if I can just read those out.
Please do.
Incorrect specification, incorrect detailing, which I think you've covered. Non-compliant installation, inadequate coordination with MEP services.
Yeah.
And coordination with door installations. Movement of the structure in a fire state. What does that mean? Is that when the building's on fire?
I think what they're saying is all of the petitioning will be tested in its cold state, i.e. the structure itself doesn't move.
Yes.
Whereas buildings will move in a fire, and some of that is taken up with deflection details, particularly under live loads. But there isn't, I don't think, a test in a live load. Alex, Robert, any sort of thoughts on that?
Well, I've had before. Robert says so. There's a section in the proof document B which talks about making a provision for building movement in a fire state, and it gives an arbitrary 40mm figure. So it's just a case that we need to just consider the actual building movement in a fire, and if that could have an adverse effect on the dry lining.
Matt, you've got your hand up.
Yes, sorry, I'm typing frantically, but it's it's just one item that I thought may benefit from specific mention. I mentioned previously inherent oversimplification, but there's one additional point in there that I think stands out for me, and that's the common misconception that a plasterboard alone achieves a fire performance. So the number of times I hear, well, one board gives half an hour, and that is fairly commonplace within the industry, and is compounded by the additional assumption that fire performance works on a stackable basis. So people will assume that a board gives half an hour, therefore 2 boards will provide an hour. It's, in my experience, responsible for some of the misspecifications that we see.
Good, thank you. There was also interfacing with structure and reference to reactive coatings.
Yeah.
There was mixing of various manufacturers' materials, which I think Martin brought up this morning. Non-compliant adaptation and maintenance, environmental damage, extended heights, and excessive tolerances in the structure.
Yeah, they're all good points.
Okay, can you scroll down, please?
Sorry, can I just chuck in very quickly in support of what Matt said? Being the idiot end user here, until about 18 months ago, what Matt just said is true. 1 board is 30 minutes, 2 boards was 60 minutes, and so on and so forth. So I'm ahead of service, and I used to believe that until about 18 months ago. I think if we do anything here, stressing that for everyone else, that is not true, I think could be remarkably important.
I think where that came from initially was a deemed to satisfy document from memory BRE 128, which is one of the archived documents post Grenfell. And basically, the only way that you can demonstrate compliance is to go to one of the systems owner. So it could be one of the manufacturers or one of the big distributors who have their own systems, and ask for evidence of compliance against one of the recognized tests to the level of performance that you're looking for.
Or you can actually use material calculation processes, or like the Structural Timber Association have undertaken a number of tests to demonstrate different compliance of a timber-based solution.
Mm-hmm.
While it's absolutely on the money that one layer doesn't give you 30 and two gives you 60, more often than not, the final solution does actually come out as one layer in the assembly gives you 30, and two layers in the assembly gives you 60.
Yes. Yeah, you're right.
It's a delicate one.
It is, Martin.
Okay, shall we scroll down? Jess, could you scroll down, please?
So I've got question 2 is what information is needed about dry lining and firewalls to ensure they perform as required.
Yes.
So I've got something in green here at the top. It is important to understand how the information will be used and how the context will vary, what information is required. Initially, this was the subject of quite a lot of debate, largely driven by a worry about information overload. However, with a truly cross-disciplinary team of SMEs, it was possible to drill down to understand the detail of why a role would need certain information. The aim was to collect all the information all stakeholders need against all products and leave it to each role to configure their software applications to see only the information they need for that individual task. I think that probably needs sort of condensing down a little bit at some point.
Yeah, that was really for people to understand that we want to know the detail for certain purposes, but we recognise that some people merely want to know that it's coming from a certified and qualified provider.
Okay, understand then. Yeah. Okay, so the designer should ensure that the firewalls using dry lining have up-to-date and relevant test evidence or third-party certification and detailed installation details relevant to that unique installation. And then there's some comments here based on requirements, specification, and performance, and materials, and construction, and the installation details.
Can you scroll down, Jess?
And the inspection and the maintenance, which each of those goes into a lot of detail, but they're all relevant. Other information that was required is system height, fire performance required, time in minutes, and importantly, to which standard. I think that's an important part of it because there are 2 standards that these products are currently tested to. What the substrate is and the interfacing elements and the openings. The installation date and inspection date and schedule, design criteria, what services they are suitable, not suitable for, anti-tamper indicators, relevant test assessment information, recognition that not everything can be tested, design intent, amendment or recognition and third-party assessment in relation to point 2, correct and competent detail information, sufficient site pack information, education experience at all levels from specification, tender, procurement and installation checking records. Yeah, there I think, unless there are other comments that you've had that I haven't got, George.
Scroll down, Jess. There's just 3 more on there, Joe. There's fire test evidence, classification reports, and manufacturer's detail tested or assessed, which is probably covered actually in those other elements. But let's we can pick up on that. Good.
Okay. So again, any comments on things that have been missed primarily, and any other contributions that you'd like to add into the chat? Move on to question 3, George.
Please.
Okay, question 3. What tasks are required to ensure dry lining and firewall is installed, commissioned, inspected, and maintained properly?
Can I just explain the context of this, please, Joe?
Please do.
It's a given that what we should be doing is ensuring that the people that are either supplying this information, either selling these products, specifying them, installing them, and handing them over, are competent people. That should be, we cover that in question 4, but we don't want to just leave it to the fact that they're competent. In the M&E sector, we do a lot of work with PFI hospitals, and everybody tends to use things like SFG20, which is a very detailed way of standardizing the way particular tasks and activities are carried out. So even though somebody like Skanska would employ a competent refrigeration engineer to carry out work, they still issue them a detailed work instruction that's got the 10 things that they've got to do to maintain a chiller. And they're doing that not because they're trying to undermine the competence of the person. It's a checklist that then reinforces the fact that the work's been done. And what we're trying to do here is to reinforce the or support the process to ensure that when something is inspected, that there are some standardized ways that a subject matter expert would carry out. And therefore, that would make it easy for Paul, for example, at Metropolitan, to be able to check that the work had been done in the way, maybe doing spot checks. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. Well, that's what I'm trying to achieve, if that makes sense.
Again, I'm going to come in from the end user's point of view and say that sounds like a very, very good idea to me.
Good. So there's some good suggestions here. Correct installation is critical to the success of the dry lining and firewalls. Buildings will move over time, and its performance must be assessed against a potential fire in a building that could happen years after the installation. To ensure the firewall using dry lining is installed, commissioned, and maintained so that the firewall will perform as specified, the following should be checked. Stage inspections by a competent person at delivery, at first and second fix, and at jointing. Each stage should be recorded and images referenced to the location. The names of the installers and a record of their qualifications, training, CPD, and experience. A record of the specification and test evidence should be kept and made accessible. Any maintenance requirements for the dry lining and fire stopping should be kept on file and handed over to the FM team. All firewalls using dry lining should be clearly marked on the drawings. All firewalls using dry lining should be clearly labelled above the line of the ceiling to ensure that any future penetrations can be designed and constructed to ensure the performance of the firewall can be maintained. And then we have requirements, specification, and materials. Under requirements, legislation, standards it complies with, warranty conditions, service life statement. Specification of the cavity barrier must not be changed from that specified for the external wall system. Fire engineering assessments must be acceptable from a competent fire engineer. The client's consultant and contractors should appreciate the limitations of the direct field of application for product tests. Materials, Do not make substitutions of products when systems tested against either the BS or EN. The installation, as-built O&M manuals to show the locations of the walls and where possible for RPs color-coded to show the levels of fire resistance. Application of the fire barriers include compatible components. Product lifespan within a specific system it's being used within. I know that that's a case with some bats. Preferably certified materials. I think by that the writer is suggesting third-party certified materials and products and systems should be installed by third-party certified installers. Inspection, proof of competency of inspectors. Post-work inspection would include regular inspections with all parties present. Same as above with fire door manufacturers and passive fire protection. Pictures, evidence of all phases on the install, and benchmarking prior to installation. I think that benchmarking is a really good suggestion. A responsibility matrix, installation records, commissioning records, incorporation into housing elements records. Dampers should belong to the wall they are hosted in, so as to be considered in any proposed modification of the hosting element parent-child relationship. Unique identifiers, barcode.
Jess, can you scroll down a little? Have we lost you, Joe?
And act.
You're breaking up, Joe. Joe?
George, do you want to take over?
Yeah, I'll take over.
I'm going to pass the baton to you.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm not sure where so essentially what we've got there, we've got, I think we're on to review the design to ensure it satisfies the project. I think these are general terms. Ensure the installation is installation companies familiar with dry lining being installed. Benchmarks. Okay. Is there anything that the team? I've noticed that somebody's got their hand up. Unfortunately, like Joe, I can't see who that is. Good old teams. Has somebody got some comment to make, please?
It's Duncan Alabaster.
Duncan.
George, if you click on the two little people next to request control at the top, you can see everybody on the call.
Oh, great. Thank you. Hi, Duncan. Go ahead.
It was a while ago, to be honest, so don't forget it. It was ages ago, so don't worry.
I apologise.
That's right, no problem.
We're you know, yeah. Anyway, I won't make any excuses. Okay, so one of the important things about this, in my view, is that when I talk to any asset manager or maintenance organisation, they don't see the dry lining as being an asset. Yeah, and there's no standard descriptions, so there's no standard procedures that I'm aware of inspecting or maintaining or ensuring that the firewall, to use the term, is actually performing and is being managed. And certainly, Joe, I mean, your experience of in the BIM world, would you say that that's I think that's an omission that we've got in BIM at the moment, because it seems to me to be an extremely important element in the process, but it's one that, like cavity barriers, is missed.
You're talking about post-installation here, George?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. I think certainly in my experience, we do have a few clients who, there are the exception to the rule, who ask for information about partitions as in terms of assets. But when they do, it's generally at a type level, and this isn't type level information. This is instance-based information, because you could have the same wall type in different situations with different performance requirements against each instance. So there is a kind of mismatch in terms of what people are asking for, and it's always interesting that it's not a standard requirement of Kobe, any fire information at all. So
you're quite right about. You're quite right in terms of you can have the same asset with different performance requirements. So that is to say that an internal wall system could be specified and installed to meet a certain acoustic performance, but not its fire performance. And a similar wall could be installed for its fire performance and not its acoustic performance. And that's the thing that's was driving me to get the word fire involved, so that people could immediately understand what was being installed and what performance, particularly around fire, because of its fire safety, could be seen immediately on a drawing. Matt Taylor, because of the experience that you had in your prior work, or Alex, what happens when you leave site and you've signed it off? Do you get called back for inspections, or is it something that you feel should be put into a schedule?
I've never been called back to an inspection afterwards, Joe, to be honest. I'm not sure about Alex, but quite often once we've stated that something is appears to be installed as per the details, or once we've provided the information, that seems to be pretty much the end of it. What I would say is, in relation to, it worries me to some extent in relation to repairs to plasterboard and repairs to walls, purely because we get involved with quite a lot of O&M documents for contractors, and the O&M document by nature tends to be quite generic. So there are sections within it, for example, sort of maintenance, which is more geared towards sort of M&E services, etc. It doesn't really apply so much to plasterboard, whilst what is more important with plasterboard walls is to recognise that a repair may not bring that wall back in line with the original detail. A remedial detail may be very different to the original detail that was submitted to the project.
So what you're saying there, Matt, is we need to add some lines on ongoing maintenance and where repairs happen. Could you drop a couple of lines into the chat?
I'm just doing that at the moment.
Lovely. Alex, what were your thoughts?
Yes, so the world's sort of changing with our clients a lot, and so a lot of our inspections now are carried out on our client's own QA, QC electronic software. So we use BIM 360, Dalux, MBuild, Field View, and what that does is that gives, when we raise an issue, that then gets correctly allocated to the people it needs to be allocated to. They have an opportunity to sign that work off and provide the evidence that they've signed that off. Photographs if we're not there, or if we are there, we can re-inspect, and then that has a complete closure. I mean, you know, written reports tended to not necessarily always get responded to in the same way, but these, you know, I'm quite a big fan of BIM 360. It's quite a nice, user-friendly and field view, and it just allows that total closing out of an issue. Doesn't allow the works to proceed without it being closed out.
Thanks, Alex. I can see a couple of hands up. I can see Debbie and Paul. Debbie, do you want to go next?
Yeah. So just picking up on Alex's point, I think that's fine to a certain extent, but let's say there is a bit that's being remediated, or some retrofit or something like that. Depending on what the requirement is, it could change what the competence demand requirement is, because you're focusing on a different aspect of performance or something else. So it's got to be really granular, and a lot of the time it's just, you know, it's just about saying, oh well, that role should be good enough to do that bit of remediation, but actually we need to be more explicit in things that change the competency profile, demand profile, from my perspective, and granular enough. That's what we're doing in an Innovate project with George at the moment. So happy to share some more thoughts on that without getting too technical.
It's a nice way of looking at things. Thanks, Debbie. Paul, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception that the BIM models will carry things like the correct material. One of the issues I'd raised with Autodesk a couple of years ago was they had walls which were 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour and 2 hour fire rating, which had exactly the same plasterboard material applied to them and just a different thickness in the cavity. Because the actual material properties were not correct and linked to a particular specification from the particular manufacturers on different plasterboard types, etc. So generally, architects will just use a generic plasterboard or dry lining material, and actually the specification is left to the people on site. Or they may have some performance things relating to this room, wet areas require this thing, etc. But it's how does the location of the particular plasterboards get located in the models, and for the guys on site doing the maintenance, how do they know that this is the actual location of the materials in the correct location?
So this is, yeah. So again, some interesting points there. If you can drop your comments into the chat box, then they can be sort of swept up and added to the document. Is there anybody else's? Have I missed anybody else's hands?
I'd like to say one thing, Joe. I've not put my hand up. I'd like to say one thing, just to build on what your answer to Debbie. As far as COBE is concerned, the UK implementation of COBE doesn't restrict us to what type of assets we actually want to address. Yeah, that comes down to what the client thinks is important. Whereas there is a contrary view, which is the US version, where it is more focused largely around the M&E elements. So there's no restriction as far as the UK is concerned from that perspective, which I think is sensible. And the other aspect is, as Joe was saying, the attributes allow you to assign any attributes against an element. So if fire resistance or fire integrity or fire insulation are values that we need to be incorporating against certain types of product, then that's completely accommodated within the COBE schema.
Brilliant. So have we captured all of the information that we need in the comments to that last question?
I think so.
Good. Okay. So that was question 3. And I think the next one, this is interesting. Question 4, what level of competence training needs to be in place? So those involved in the design and installation should be able to demonstrate training qualifications relevant to the systems they design and install, and be members of a recognized organization such as the finishes and interior sector. Ongoing demonstrable CPD of installer, not simply the company they work for. For example, operatives installing products should have achieved a level 2 diploma. Sorry, the chat has, here we go. Talk about service occupations for passive fire protection. Supervisor should have achieved level 3. Installer should have a manufacturer-led product-specific installation guide provided. Manufacturers should offer installation training, either in their own right or subcontracted out to provide that service. Code of practice should include training materials. Competence of training needs to be determined. And then on maintenance, manufacturer-specific installation, inspection, maintenance, repair, replacement, and recycling requirements. Interesting, sustainability's got a touch there. Should be retained to inform future maintainers of the manufacturer's recommendations. Talking about ASFP, that's the Association of Specialist Fire Protection, level 1, 2, 3 is required. A lack of third-party accredited training for dry lining, we agree. Approved installer qualifications, improved inspector qualifications, design team training, competence required to be able to specify design. Okay, there's some narrative here.
That's come through from Matt. So, Matt, do you want to summarise what you're saying there?
Yeah, apologies about that. There is quite a bit there. But for me, this is a massive topic because first we need to. It's all very well to say we need to ensure a certain level of training. We need to make sure that the people who are installing dry lining are adequately trained, etc. But first, I think we need to understand the limitations of the workforce of whom we're asking this. The majority of, to my experience, the majority of our operational workforce within the UK are of Eastern European origin. Now, I say that entirely without prejudice. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be getting any of these buildings built in the first place, to be honest. But where we're looking at contractors who are taking on personnel to complete projects, they are very much under a lot of pressure to ensure that the people who they're employing are competent, but those people may well be working for another contractor the next week, the next day even. So at present, from what I see, and I spoke to somebody on Friday who was responsible for the NVQ's training apprenticeships for one of the leading dry lining subcontractors in the UK. And the difficulties that they have is that they will invest in huge amounts of training, qualification for their workforce, who then take that, mark that on their CV, and then off they go to the next highest bidder. So I think I mentioned within that text, this particular contractor invested £250,000 in the apprenticeship scheme for 16 apprentices to train them up to get them qualified. Out of those 16, only 2 had the were willing to sit through the course. The rest of them didn't turn up, left early, etc. Just didn't want to be bothered to continue with it. And then of those 2, when they qualified, they then left, I think, the following week. So this is whatever we're putting forward as a suggestion needs to be focused on overcoming the challenges that are there at the moment. It's not a permanent workforce that we've got in place where contractors have got 300 installers on PAYE. So anything that we're putting forward needs to take that into account and needs to be practical in terms of application. Hence why I've questioned in that opening statement, who should pay for it? How do we ensure that workforce are qualified and are competent?
That's a good point, Matt. Good point. The issue is always one of what if we train them and they leave, and the opposite to that is what if we don't train them and they stay. It's an ongoing issue. Has anybody else got any views on that? I can't see any hands up. Paul, I can see your hand up. And Debbie. Sorry,
it's probably from last time, but I mean, coming from a sort of the old CAD management and then BIM, it's the same sort of issues that we used to have within training staff in architectural practices, etc. That if you train them, so tying in training to contracts, so basically they need to repay monies if they're going to carry out an apprenticeship or do training, having a period afterwards in which they have to be linked to that employer is one way of dealing with it. So we dealt with it through employment contracts to make sure staff stayed instead of just doing the courses and then running off.
Yeah, Debbie, I'm interested to hear your view.
Well, I've made a few comments in the chat. I mean, I think the bigger problem is there needs to be better supply chain competency management and organizational competency management before you get to the individual bit. The two are linked. But I don't know quite where things have got with MHCLG and its review of competent person schemes and all the rest, and how things like the CSCS card may move to, instead of just being a card that represents you've got a qualification, to something that's more of a stronger competency profile. So there's other things in the sector that influence this, but for me the most critical thing is being better at articulating what the demand is first, and then asking organizations to demonstrate whatever means they want that they've got people that are competent to that demand. Yes.
I think you're right. I think you're right. The more that you start to outline what's required as a level of competence, the more it'll come through. Jimmy, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, I just really wanted to add on what was being said there. I think something that we see is this lack of competence, but right throughout the value chain, if you like, and perhaps not lack of competence, but the fluctuation and the breadth we see. We get asked some questions around a 30-minute plasterboard. In other instances, we have highly detailed, highly skilled architects, installers, main contractors. It really varies so much that I think the level of detail that Matt's kind of outlined there needs to be done at all parts of the value chain to really understand what is needed for an architect to be working on this scheme, what's needed for a canal, for or a SINIAT or British Gypsum specification manager to be working on it as well. These things aren't really in place. I think that's a big issue within the industry as well.
So one of the discussions that I became involved in through the working group 12 on competence is, if we take the competence of the function rather than the role, it becomes more palatable. So, for example, I know that there are some architects on the call here today. If we started to say the competence of an architect to specify a petition should be, the architects, I think, would rightly say, well, hang on, I'm qualified and this is my level of experience, etc. If we actually turn that round and talk about the competence of specification writing, so make it specification writing, installing, supervising, selling, buying, I think we get a different approach to it. And I think that's one of the routes which is currently being explored. Was that you agreeing, Debbie?
Yeah, I agree with you. And then also I think you can do some easier stuff around kind of pathways and career pathways around that. I think it's more holistic. Everything's viewed too much through the lens of a role, really, as a proxy for things. And actually a lot of stuff through off-site and all the rest will become more productized, and therefore more activity and task-based rather than role-based or team-based. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm glad. I'm delighted with that. George, I can see your hand up. And Jimmy again, and then I think we'll move on to the next question.
Sure. Could that feed back into question 3? So, Debbie, on that. So, what you were saying there, Joe, in making it more function-based, I think you said.
Yeah.
That could feed back into the standard methodologies.
On question 3.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do that separately and send that through to you after this call. Thanks.
Joe, if I could add just one thing very quickly on this. One thing I have noted that the specialist contractors are exceptionally good at is auditing what has gone in. That is something that they can control. So they'll have quality auditors and can actually take a detail and now that, as Alex mentioned, things like PIM 360 and different Bluebeam and different electronic management systems are being implemented, we're seeing more and more quality assessment from specialist contractors, and that is something that they've got control over. Now, my personal view is that if this increase in qualification, increasing knowledge is introduced from the top down, and from that I mean from specification point down through the chain, that is much easier for then the specialist contractor to be able to control through that QA process. They can know that they've got a competent detail. At the moment, we're working from details that may not be specific to a certain interface, may not be relevant to what's being built in all areas of the project. And the people who are more often than not making up that deficit are the guys who are doing the installation, who aren't a controlled asset in some ways, and they are picking up the the shortfall in that information and making their own mind up on what will work in that location. Now, if we increase knowledge through that process, that should increase quality.
Great. Could you add some notes to the feed on that? Jimmy, I'm going to come to you and then move on to the next question.
Sorry, I took my hand down now, Joe, so you can move on.
Okay. So next question then. On that one.
Can I? Right. So if I just introduce this, one of the things that I was speaking to the MD of Cider Eyes a few weeks ago, and he was very interested in the golden thread and had a very clear idea as to what the golden thread meant. And what it meant to him was that the product replacement side of things was going to be addressed. So his frustration is that he can spend months helping define what type of product would satisfy a performance requirement, and then find that it gets swapped out for something else afterwards, which is a constant frustration. I know that that all manufacturers have, and in fact, breaking specifications is also something that's hugely frustrating for designers as well, isn't it? So what we're trying to do here, I explained to him, he's quite right that the golden thread does accommodate that, but that's not all that it's about. But it is a really important element. And what we're trying to do here within BIM for Housing, we've recognised that one way of addressing that is through a proper change management process, which would include technical submittals. But to achieve that, we have to address the fact that designers are probably more reluctant than they were 15, 20 years ago because of procurement methods and risk and liabilities to actually say, this is the product that we recommend should be used for that particular solution. But my view is that unless we do have that type of definition, we've got no baseline upon which to manage change. So that's what we've tried to accommodate in this.
Thanks, George. So we've got some suggestions here under the question. So just to go back to the question itself, question 5, how should changes to dry lining and firewalls be managed and recorded? Any alterations to the firewall constructed from dry lining should be referred back to the system owner for advice before altering the installed firewall. A schedule of safety critical elements for the building to include products specified. A baseline against which to compare proposed alternative products. Some designers have expressed reluctance to propose, not specify, a specific manufactured product that will satisfy the design due to liability, procurement rules and fees. Just on that subject, we are moving to a contractor's design portions. The contractor may be a small SME with no design liability, and there is a big gap there between leaving it to that stage to be done, I would suggest. The schedule would be locked at a specific design stage, after which changes to products specified should not occur except for exceptional reasons, and I think that's part of the gateway process now. A formal change management system is required to ensure that any unavoidable changes are validated by a responsible person, that is the original designer and/or fire engineer. There is a well-established change management process in construction called technical submissions, in which requested changes from the specification recommendations that were created by the designers and selected manufacturers need to be formally reviewed and approved. Design and build procurement has affected that process, and it should be re-established in a way that the performance of a proposed document and its constituent components is easily compared with the proposed alternative, and if agreed, it is recorded as a technical deviation. Validation of changes would include verifying that the new product meets all the requirements for the application, with no detrimental to the overall design, the details of which should be recorded. Changes in the product may be made between design and procurement, procurement and installation, handover, ongoing maintenance. I've got a slight issue with that word product. If we think of dry lining, dry walls, firewalls as a product, it's wrong. We should be thinking in systems terms and not product terms. More onus needs to be on the client during the collation of information requirements and the updating of design models to an installed content suitable for asset facilities management. Full disclosure of the products is needed at handover, so that after work stage 7, if a manufacturer goes out of business or product changes, the record is there in perpetuity. Asset databases must be kept up to date with core data for new installs. Installation documents should be held in a centralized digital location. Once BIM COBie levels data is manageable within the asset management system, then this will be used as the main source of data. BIM, CAFA, asset and housing management systems must inform the change management process. Health and safety files for each building, cradle to grave, must be supplied, recorded and be updated with notification of changes and the implications. Warranty information of the existing and proposed product should be provided to allow proper consideration to be made on the selection of an alternative or replacement if a product has a shorter life than another. This information should be available to inform selection. Some of the products will be in locations that are difficult to locate. The longevity of a product could have safety implications. Compliance systems should be informed with the information from the asset information model. I think that's AIM. Asset tagging, barcode systems and processes should be considered as forming part of the change management process. And I think there is some development on DOIs that would probably relate to that, George.
Yep.
Procurement should be included in the process, recording what was purchased and feeding that into the BIM process to locate where they were installed or which products they're replacing. Specification or design brief for the business performance on product should be recorded in a machine readable format to enable validation against the golden thread. Record the compatibility and compliance of any ancillaries and confirm they comply with the test data. That's ironmongery, door access control system, vision panels and vents. Any adjustment, repair, addition to, removal of a product, ironmongery or fittings must be recorded and should be undertaken by a licensed accredited contractor. This includes and modification to an existing asset. The asset information needs to enable comparison, but the original performance spec of the AOV, sorry, no idea what that is, and the related information such as fire strategy and cause and effect should form part of the technical deviation process.
Yeah, sorry, can I just explain where that's come from?
Yeah.
In terms of change management, what we're trying to do is introduce something in here that's generic across the industry, or certainly across all of the different elements. Because if we don't do something that actually fits in with the way contractors are managing all of the elements that go in, then we've got an issue. So that's why this particular section includes reference to doors or AOVs, an automatic opening vent.
Thank you.
And probably, arguably, we should perhaps have taken this out for this particular work session. But the point is that what we want to do is to have it so that we've got a methodology that everybody can buy into. I think possibly if we go down, I think the principle is probably covered, and we've got input from different things. Can you see the blue section in there?
Okay.
Joe?
Yes,
great. I think let's move on to that, because I think that's been created by this group.
Okay. So it talks about floor plans with compartment lines identified. Those compartment lines could then be better defined by asset tagging, showing how the compartments are built, such as, oh, here we've got 30-minute plasterboard again. Drywall could consist of metal or timber stud work, dry lining and firewalls with plasterboard or cement fiber boarding on each face of the studwork imperforate from floor to ceiling level, fitted with a rock wool or mineral wool insulation tape to fill. This is a description of dry lining. A schedule of safety critical elements for the building to include products specified. Baseline against which to compare proposed alternative products. Some designers have expressed reluctance. This is a copy of what was in earlier. This schedule will be locked at specific design stage. I think that was addressed earlier.
I think all of this is replicated.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, it is, because we've gone BIM and CAFAM.
Yeah, that's
asset tagging. Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Scroll down, Jess.
Okay. Why would products need to be changed is a question. Correct design with all parties should remove this notion where possible. I think the answer to that is the ubiquitous value engineering.
Yeah.
Architects and designers must engage at stage 2 with manufacturers. I completely agree with that. And it's specifiers, the people who are specifying the product. The earlier you engage with the manufacturers, the better the outcome. Via a unique ID, maybe there is a separation between the requirement and the solution whereby the requirement remains consistent. However, the solution could be changed, modified. Reinstallation, recommissioning records. Installation management system showing before and after records and compliance. Clear variation record showing what has been instructed and ensuring that this is correctly designed before being installed. This is commonly pushed through last minute with any design necessarily falling into the tell us what's required and we'll instruct you category. Build and design, which we hear about sort of quite often. And that brings us to the end, I think, of the comments that we've received, George.
Yes, I think that's really very helpful. Sorry for the duplication on that one.
So I've got Matt Taylor's hand up at the moment. Is that legacy hand, Matt, or something to add?
No, that was just in relation to the technical submittals, Joe. It was mentioned that was mainly in relation to value engineering. I don't agree on that point. 90% of the technical submittals we're involved with relate to incorrectly specified items.
Interesting.
So it is where there is a conflicting performance in the specification, or a product has been, quite often now we're looking at specifications where a product, a manufacturer name is referenced but no specific product, or a product without the full definitions of that allow specification of the exact product. So for example, rock wool insulation or rock wool thickness, whatever. And quite often these technical submittals are being raised in relation to that to try and clarify what the contractor is to install. Now, back on one of the points that George previously mentioned, sorry. What I am finding is that when technical submittals are being issued, the approvals that we're getting are nowhere near as definitive as they have been in the past. There is a sort of current mentality that if a contractor issues something, then it is their responsibility to ensure that that is compliant, etc., which I don't disagree with that, but there is no real solid approval process to some of these documents that are being issued onto projects.
Interesting. Some more hands up. Debbie and then Jimmy.
Yeah, just picking up, Joe, on your point about product versus a system. Yes. Mm-hmm. What do you see the differences being there? Just for my information, because you could call it a product system, but there's different ways of framing this.
So a product is a 12.5 mil plasterboard.
Yeah. Okay.
A system is a specified dry lining system that will give a level of performance as required.
Okay, so that's where the performance piece comes in. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome, Jimmy.
Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce Matt's point, really. I think the writing that was in italics that's just on the top of the screen now was mine, where I said, why are we value engineering? And then, you know, if Matt's point is that the specification coming out is causing huge amounts of problems for the installer and everyone down the line, And that was the reason for my second bullet point. It's quite frustrating where you're right, you know, everything needs to be done yesterday on a building with everyone involved, and that causes corners to be cut or rushed decisions, when actually if it was planned and coordinated right from the outset, as manufacturers, and I'm sure, you know, the other manufacturers would agree, we want to be involved in that process so we can have time to discuss and create a suitable specification to meet the requirements with the architect and the main contractor. And just, I still don't think that's happening enough within the industry.
Yeah,
I don't think there's nearly as much value engineering, Jimmy, as a lot of people would think happens now. That the risk involved to the contractor is it's not generally worthwhile value engineering a job unless there's huge amounts of money to be made by more efficient systems. It does still occur, but in terms of technical submittals and like-for-like products, very rarely in my experience.
that's a really interesting point that's come out of this discussion, I think, because the assumption is that that's where the changes happen. So I think one of the things that came up much earlier in the recommendations here.
We've lost you, Joe. I'm going to jump in, if I may, and just ask Joe Stott a question on this. Sorry, Joe. You okay? I'll press on for the moment. You can come back in when you got a better connection, Joe. Joe Stott, the MBS specification, MBS chorus, for example. As a layperson, I've tried to step through the output from an architect that's used MBS chorus, in particular for firewalls, which was my sort of not firewalls, sorry, fire doors. And the specification actually defined a performance, but it took quite a lot of interpretation. So in other words, what it basically said was that the fire door assembly needed to comply with BS this and BS that. So two or three different BS specifications, and also needed to be read in conjunction with the fire strategy plan. And I said to the architect, can we not actually get something a bit more explicit so that somebody that's maybe procuring that door knows what product that they should be looking for and what the detailed spec. And they said, well, quite frankly, we don't really understand that either. The way in which we go about that is that we'll produce that specification and then share it with a fire door specialist, and they've got the detailed knowledge to look at the performance requirement. They know the British standards much better than we do, and therefore they will then interpret what the solution might be, and then that comes back. Now, the concern that I've got about that process, which does seem to be quite wide normal practice, is that we never end up in the O&M information with what the derived solution actually is. We simply still end up with this reference off to specifications. So if you're an FM and you need to replace that fire door, and you look at the MBS specification, you've got to go through the same level of process the original designer would, which seems to be mad. And I'd be very interested to ask you, Joe, but also Jimmy, who's probably on the other side of this, where you might support Joe in terms of interpreting the MBS spec against the outcome. Joe.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know what you mean, and I recognise the kind of treasure hunts to find the true source of information that you're talking about. I mean, we're in the process at the minute internally of trying to control our specifications kind of centrally, because I think within the industry there's this, it probably comes down to competency that we were talking about before, but there's this view that as an architect you can specify anything, and you know we kind of recognise that that's a dangerous position to start from, I think, because everything has become so specialized. So we're currently have, you know, we have, I think we have 3 members of staff who are allowed to author the kind of master specification, and it's, you know, they're specialists in decrypting all of these, you know, the standards and the current requirements, with the view that that helps, you know, as long as the other architects kind of down the food chain, if you like, you know, they're consuming these specifications. As long as they use those specifications and don't deviate from them, then we're quite comfortable. But there is a lot of interpretation in that, and you're exactly right. You know, we try and, there's a lot of conversation at the minute in terms of how those specs look from a user's perspective, and bringing the requirements, you know, to the fore is absolutely key, because you understand, you know, you know you're looking for a partition, and you know that there's a fire requirement against it. So that should be the first thing. You know, you should have a checklist of show me the wall types that can achieve A, B, and C, and then that reduces your selection. And yeah, I mean, what strikes me with this is, I think within the industry, and this probably relates to procurement and fee levels, is, you know, there's been a huge swing, hasn't there, from architects specifying and working with closely with manufacturers through to this kind of D&B performance requirements, where, you know, I've actually had conversations with contractors, you know, when we were starting with BIM, and we were kind of excited about the level of information that we can now provide them with much earlier in the process. I have sat down with some major contractors, and they kind of said to us, well, you do know that that's not what we want, because that doesn't give us the wriggle room. That doesn't give us the, you know, the ability to tender and drive the prices. So there is still this conflict, and I think that still exists. But interestingly, with the walls, I mean, the reason that I was keen to join this session is because we're reviewing our internal specs at the minute for partition and dry lining. And we kind of coming at it from a different view. We were looking at things like embedded carbon.
Yes.
So when and things with embedded carbon, that needs to be calculated very early, you know, stages 2, 3, you know, so where you can still make those design changes and you can still have an impact. But in order to do that, you need a lot more information in that model than you would normally, or, you know, you could argue than the fees would typically support, I think is the truth of it. So, you know, we've got to kind of box clever with that. So yeah, I'm kind of defining it in my mind as, I think that the models and the information generally needs a big step up from where we are at the moment. You know, it's kind of like an HD version of the information that's produced traditionally, or certainly over the last kind of 10 years, I think. That's my observation.
That's very helpful. Just before I pass back to you, Joe, could I just ask Jimmy, as the other side of that particular negotiation, and also, sorry, the gentleman from ETEX.
Robert.
Yeah, Robert. Yeah. Jimmy, what's your response to that?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I think we see a breadth in the quality of information we are provided. I think, you know, I'll see details where it will say acoustic performance 50, and that's that. So then we are saying, well, is that RW? Is that? And there's this sort of lack of understanding about what they're actually asking for. Or we'll see fire rating, it will just say 60, not to BS or to EN, or 60/60, or in both directions. And if we as a manufacturer aren't involved early, all of that seems to get pushed to the installing contractor, where there's a 150-page, you know, acoustic report and 150-page fire strategy report, and someone has to interpret that, and there seems to be this sort of passing of responsibility around various people. So yeah, I think it's a big challenge in that early standardization is super important for us as well, and it's where we want to be involved. And I think from the main contractor perspective, I think they're starting to see value in standardizing their approach, so that their party wall is a party wall across all 10 of their residential schemes they've got coming up, and we provide the test data. You know, it's all clearly ironed out from the beginning. We're certainly moving in that direction a bit more. So yeah, I'd say that kind of sums up where we're at.
George, could I just jump in here? It's just that obviously, in terms of anything that's specifications, we are moving to the era where a lot of these specs will be made machine readable. And even now, with some of the work we're doing for people who have got competency compliance platform, we mine and make sense of specs and standards and stuff very specifically, because no one really thinks that the competency domain would have a play in this, but we deal with semantics, the meaning of things, and making things explicit. So this could help a lot, but it's not in the DNA of the sector to think, oh my goodness, a whole another discipline which isn't even recognized as a discipline in the sector, competency management's not recognized as a discipline, actually has some of the ability to do this already. Yeah.
I think you're right, Debbie. I've just written down competence. Actually, competence reflects on an awful lot of the questions that we've talked about for people to be.
Oh, we've lost him. So he'll come back hopefully.
Robert, do you have anything to comment on that?
I think I agree. Really, it's almost like a routine job that our people will have to do to go through the information and actually work out what they mean, because what's being written in specifications or in sort of information provision documents doesn't actually relate to, quite often doesn't relate to the reality of the standards, the reality of the products, the reality of the regs. It's kind of an impression of them. It looks right when you read it the first time, but actually quite often it breaks down the further in you go. So there's a lot of interrogation of what's really needed and what's actually wanted at the beginning of jobs. So standardization would help with that. But I think people a better understanding of what is actually being specified and what is actually needed.
I mean, I have to say horribly from an employee's point of view, it's because we've lost lots of those skills. We moved to performance specs years ago, and that was just easy. You don't have to know anything then. I just need the wall to last 60 minutes, lads, to turn. Yeah. And that's unfortunately that's the way we went. It was cheaper. It was easier. It was quicker. Performance spec. You don't have to know anything. You just, I need this. Go do. So a form of standardisation, and I mean that's why I was very pleased to see within the building safety bill that procurement professionals are going to be required to have a level of competency, so we can start getting these things a bit better. But that, I hate to admit it, I really do, but we just lost so many of those skills as we moved away from it being a very in-house, very highly skilled thing. We just farmed it all out, I'm afraid. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that out loud, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, one of the things that is probably just worth mentioning is that I was introduced, under BIM for Housing, we've got an off-site group, and one of the members of that off-site group was producing training material for the Supply Chain Sustainability School, which is an organisation that, I've been involved in the industry for donkey's years with change management, and I'd not come across them. But it's a very impressive organisation, and I think probably there's a lot of people on this call that maybe are involved in it as well. But the significance of it, I think, is that they're also managing things from a supply chain perspective, and what I'm looking to do with BIM for Housing is bring that in line with what they're trying to do as well, because a lot of this change that we're trying to encourage would obviously come far better from the client organisations and also the big contractors affecting it. And the other thing I would just say, picking up on what Joe was saying earlier, actually being able to, if we look at it from an embedded carbon perspective, we've then got another seriously important driver that we're able to bring to the table and say, why should we know what type of products and materials go into our buildings? So from my perspective, I came into this a few years ago from the point of view of looking at it from an asset management perspective. So the critical thing for me was to know what products and materials had gone into the building so that we could make sure that it performs properly. And then the fire side of things and the safety side of things then adds a dimension to the need for capturing that information. And now we've got embedded carbon. So I think we've got a trinity of opportunities here to really raise this up the agenda, which clearly AHR as a design practice are doing.
George, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Yeah. Apologies for the awful connection that I've got at this end. What I was saying earlier, that competence is I think the key thing, which is running all of the way through this, and that's the competence to understand what's required for the project, its performance, as Jimmy.
I'm afraid we've lost you again, Joe.
Put it in the chat.
Yeah. Jimmy, the point that you were making earlier about the way properties are described, Paul Oakley, could you just explain to Jimmy what we're doing with the templater and how that is going to be addressing some of these issues?
Yeah, obviously, so the work we've done on the templator, which was sort of like from the lexicon point of view, was standardizing the sets of information that should be associated with a category of objects. So plasterboard would be an object, as then you might then have systems associated with that. So you can apply sets of information at either product or at system level, and you can standardize the set of information that needs to be associated with it. So one of the big issues that we have presently is that things like the unit of measure, the data type and all those sorts are all passed inconsistently. And some of the specification things you were talking about, it's defining those sorts of things so that whatever information you're asking for needs to be passed over in a consistent manner. So things like fire rating would be in accordance with a particular standard, and there'd be an agreed set of values you can deliver against. So it's an enumerated list you need to provide in accordance with that. I think that's a lot of the issues that we've been having, that we're trying to address, is that people are asking information in one way, the units of delivery are either incorrect, the 30 minutes is either written as 30 a word, it's 30, it's half hour, it's all those sorts of things that for a human to read it, you can take it on board and you've got some idea what they're standing about, but for putting it in machine readable, it becomes very difficult. So a lot of that's the sort of stuff we've been trying to deal with on that side of it. I think one of the things that George noticed from some of the projects we've been working on is the reality is designers aren't even drawing every flat in a building. So trying to actually work out where things are, never mind, if they'll draw a wall, they'll draw a long wall up a cavity, but that wall will break down into multiple different types. So as it passes through a bathroom area, so actually the way that the geospatial locating of each of the different systems and components, I think that is a major problem that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Paul. Joe, are you there?
I'm here, but I'm worried that I'm going to break up. I'll be in full flow and then I'll stop. So, George, I'm going to hand the conch over to you to summarise and close.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah. So I think the important thing here is if we can arrive at a situation where we've got explicit information that we can then bring into standardized reusable libraries, that's what we're trying to work towards. And I think if we can carry on this conversation, what we'll do is summarize the brilliant contributions that people have made. So where has this come from, this graphic that we're looking at the moment?
Sorry, George. I just threw that into the chat. As I was saying before, we're developing these kind of standard specifications within the practice, and we're working with manufacturers to do that. You know, we kind of recognizing that you know, we've got 8 offices, and so we've got multiple teams all over the country, all specifying different products and different variations of those products. So what we're trying to do is to build a standard AHR library of offerings, and they would be based on manufacturers and by sector as well. So within each sector, we might have 3 solutions from 3 different manufacturers that we know work, and we've tested them inside out.
Yeah.
And this is our, you know, in a way, it's a kind of, it's a reactive response to this kind of change process that invariably happens. You know, so we know that we're coming from a stance that works, and you know, so as soon as those change variations come in, we've got a baseline to measure against, and we're comfortable that that baseline is secure. So what I've been doing is we've got one guy doing the specification side, and then I'm trying to follow up with a Revit library that matches that content, with a view that we can, you know, provide our teams specifications and content that we've effectively pre-vetted. And this is an example, and I put it in because it's what was quite evident was the upscaling of information that we need. You know, like you said, George, at the start, typically you would have 5 wall types within a Revit model, and then someone would just kind of click on one and say this one needs to be 30-minute fire rated. But it's not enough information. It's certainly not information to extract any quantities, which is what we need to do for the carbon side of things. So, you know, it strikes me that you kill 2 birds with 1 stone with the carbon look, and you know, the need to just get more granular, get back to specifying actual products and materials rather than these kind of woolly performance specs that I think we've all fallen into.
I think that's really helpful. I'd be interested to pick up on that with you outside of this. The other interesting thing I've been running through with building safety managers in a couple of the housing associations, the outputs that we've had from the other roundtables. And one of them was explaining to me last week something that it wasn't about dry lining, but I think it has some relevance. So I'll just explain it. He was saying that they were replacing fire doors in one of their blocks, and the fire doors they cost apparently about $2,500 each, which shocked me, I must admit. I didn't realize they were that expensive. And he was saying that when they were then installing them, they spotted that the particular door that was being put on a kitchen, which was a fire door spec of a door, but they haven't put the seals around it. And the reason they'd not put the seals around it was that there was no need, in their view, because there was no oven in the kitchen. Yeah. So that went ahead, apparently. And then a few weeks later, the other part of the procurement team bought the ovens. Yeah. So they had to go and refit the fire doors with the seals. So he was using that as an example of, you know, one hand not knowing what the other hand's doing. But I wonder whether dry lining and the firewall may also be susceptible to a change of use in exactly that same way, because from an operational point of view, I'm not sure that I mean, clearly I presume that would be reflected in an updated fire strategy, but really that ought to be picked up. I don't know if anybody's got a view.
I mean, above and beyond the level of idiocy that they decided that the fire door wasn't needed to be a fire door because the kitchen didn't have an oven yet. I mean, where else was the cooker going to go? You have to ask. So
it's extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, we do see a similar kind of divide as well between, quite often we'll work with a procurement team for a contractor early doors on a project, and we'll agree standard products and standard responses. And then, you see this divide between the procurement and the construction team. And that's a key point where that change comes in. When the thing actually gets handed over to build, then they've got their own views and opinions, and we go we start that change thing. But yeah, you're right, George, in terms of thinking about future uses of these, and I think that's again ties into the sustainability thing.
Yeah,
and also kind of going back to how do you retrofit this into existing assets?
Yes.
Because the best way to reduce carbon is not to build new buildings, isn't it? It's to reuse the existing buildings. But how do you know what you can use them for? So yeah, I think there's a lot of mileage in that.
Could I just ask, just before we wrap up, we've got another 10 or 15 minutes or so, but coming back onto the sustainability and recycling side of things, Paul, when he was at BRE, was involved with a project called Buildings as a Material Bank. So the principle there is to be able to use existing stock, building stock, as a source of materials. And I've discussed this with Matt in the past about whether dry lining could be reprocessed or recycled. And Joe sent me a link last week to a specialist firm that does that type of work. Could I just ask the two manufacturers or three? I think we've got three manufacturers on. What's your position on being able to have recycled dry lining?
I'll go first if you like, but my first position on it is we've already got to a point where there's lots of waste that we're trying to work out what to do. We can be much better at design stage in terms of bespoke length components and products that will minimize a lot of that waste in the first place. So I think that is a better place to start, really, at design. How can we design out waste rather than what we're going to do with all this waste? So I think there's something there. Yeah, we're pushing to recycle what we can. It's very difficult once things have been used. Insulation's especially tricky as well, to try and recycle again. So it's high on our agenda in the UK and globally, but I think more can be done at design stage to minimise a lot of that. And I know that the guys, maybe Alex and Matt, see it a lot on site, but certainly around openings, doors, service openings, the amount of wastage that there must be, especially in a constrained market with the three manufacturers, I think we can be smarter about how we do that, which kind of is a preventative measure.
Well, just if I could pick up on that for the moment, Matt gave me over a pint one evening. He gave me a masterclass in understanding how dry lining or partitioning goes in, and he was saying that one of the biggest challenges that you've got of creating your standardized elements that have been cut to specific lengths is the poor tolerance of the construction itself. And I don't know if you want to just give an example of that, Matt, you know, when you were explaining about the slab.
Yeah, I can do, George. Just as we mentioned before, the slab tolerance, we're working on a project at the moment where the slab tolerance is plus or minus 25 millimeters. So if you look along the line of a wall, you've got a 50 mil potential adjustment in the stud length, which may still be within tolerance there. And in some cases, that's, you ask different parties within the process. Some parties will tell you that it's down to the responsibility of the installer to make sure that the background is suitable, etc., etc. But I can't think of a dry lining installer who's going to go along and flatten that slab before they start building walls. So that's one of the obstacles that we're up against, if you like, as an industry, with in relation to sort of standardization. It's something that I spoke to George about in relation to, is it possible to sort of coordinate tolerances better between packages at design stage, so that we can fully understand the tolerances that the dry lining installer are working to, i.e. a 10 millimeter overlap on the head deflection detail, and that if viewed in conjunction with a plus or minus 25 millimeters on the slab, it is going to create an issue.
Sure.
The other one, of course, that we mentioned there, Joe, was the installation speed at which the contractor has to install at for the operatives who are installing the walls to make any money on it. And the way that dry lining is priced, they really do have to sort of get that installation in very quickly. If wherever we're talking about standardization and bits like that, we have to, and waste, for example, that's something that we need to consider there as well. I agree with Jimmy's comments that I think perhaps we could do more at design stage to try and implement reduction in wastage.
Thanks, Matt. Paul, you've got your hand up.
Mine's just a question more than anything else. With the changes coming and improvements with MMC, will we be able to move to a more standardised product once more houses are factory built and more flats are factory built, if you know what I mean? I mean, does the move towards MMC help push us in this direction anyway? I mean, because I'm assuming that tolerances are less when it's MMC than when it's on-site build, yeah? So will we be moving by accident to a place where we can do a lot more standardization, cut out waste, etc., once more people are using MMC for construction? That's a question. I have no idea what the answer is, so but we're looking at MMC quite heavily, so it was really just wondering if that would improve things going that way.
I'm sure.
Certainly from my experience on volumetric construction, that would be the case. And each volumetric company would undertake its own set of testing to verify its dry lining conditions.
I think one of the MMC problems is that the rules haven't caught up with the technology. So the approved documents will ask for things that aren't actually possible, or you can comply with the approved document and it looks like you've got a fire resisting building, but actually the way the MMC has come together, it may not actually work.
But that's a different question.
Issues there.
That's not the dry lining itself. That's the bringing the units together.
It is, but it obviously has an impact on what dry lining you specify.
Yeah.
I think that there's a complexity to MMC, which is you need to overcome that complexity, and then you've got a standardized, easy to use system. But unless you've got to get over that initial hill, and then you're on freewheeling after that.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think we're just about there on the timing. Is there anything else anybody wants to raise? Joe, can I hand back to you?
We can try, George. We can try. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
For those who remember, can you hear me, Mother? And there'll be some people that will understand that, and there will some people who have no idea at all. I think that's been a fascinating conversation. I think, George, the way you've pulled different parts of the supply chain along have been really, really useful. George, I was going to ask you to just explain next stages, please.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So what we'll be doing, Richard will be and Jess will be working to draw together all of the inputs that we've had both today and also earlier. We'll rationalize those down into a master document, which will then ask various members of this team to contribute to. So we basically, it's a matter of reviewing, probably in particular with you, Joe, what we've got here, and then that will then become, if you like, a published document which will feed back into the Golden Thread Initiative group. What will then happen, though, is we'll put it up on the BIM for Housing website, and what we've done is created what we call the black box site, which will allow people to review things and keep working on this. So the principle here is that this is just the beginning of this collaboration, not the end. And we want, in particular, we want practical experiences of people that have been, I mean, like I say, I spent an evening with Matt, and the knowledge that I got from that was just tremendous. And I'm sure that most of the members of this working group have got those same levels of expertise that somebody like Paul from Metropolitan would find very useful. So that's really the next step.
Indeed, good. Well, just from our point of view, a couple of sort of coming soon to a theatre near you to look at. One is the standard which is used for the design and installation of dry lining, known as BS 8000 Part 8. It does sit alongside BS 8212, has gone through a complete revision. It's just finished peer review, and I would expect that to be published by the new year. And the second is we will be publishing a document at about the same time, which is a specifier's guide to dry lining. What I'll do, George, is I'll send you the overall where our documents are. And if anybody has got any questions specific to that, where they think we might be able to help, I'd be glad to pick up on that. Joe, I've been looking at your generics here, and I wondered whether
that was some unfortunate timing for him.
Yeah, sorry.
I think we probably know what he's asking. Can he see that, or
about?
Yeah, I think we can share that.
Shortly, doesn't it? Yeah, Joe, if you can hear me, I'll catch up with you later, if I may.
Okay. Yeah, no worries.
Lovely. George, back to you.
Yeah,
thank you,
everybody, for committing the time and effort. And once again, I apologise for sort of haranguing you over the weekend, but I think it's been very, very worthwhile, certainly from my perspective. I hope you've found it useful yourselves. And as I say, this is just the start of a longer collaboration and journey. Thanks very much. See you later.
Thanks everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Yep.